somebody handed me what amounts to a question. And let's start with, we had been talking, as you recall, the last couple of weeks back, in general, about talk serving as a kind of defense for the growing intellect, talk serving as a kind of instrumentality that separates people from what they seem to be doing, the ability, to put it in psychological terms to start with, of someone, a full Miles Davis, suddenly taking the horn away from his lips and fooling around with the spit valve, shaking the valve like it's their fault, or when you miss a serve, as everybody knows. All of you laughed at that. You don't have to know anything about music. Everybody looks at the racket. Or if you shoot pool and you miss cue, of course, you hold up the cue real straight like, boy, is this somebody... Right. On the basis of that, somebody wrote me some observations, but it amounted to a question, at least rhetorically, that based on that sort of thing, when a man's intellect seems to miscue, misfire, where does he look? Good question. He looks to the gods. That's probably not what you were expecting. But the ordinary people, in the full sense of the small letter G in quotation mark, that is where a man looks. When this thing misfires, it may go under other names. And they may not be calling it gods now. They may not be calling it a known god, but that's exactly where men look. When it really misfires, because of course you can't easily pull it out and look at it and say, boy, what a cheap brain. And look at your friends like, well, it's not my fault. Some of it's misfired on me. I wanted to pick up what we were talking about last time we were taping. Do you recall that I presented you a little scenario that I made up, more or less, and then I asked you a question. It had to do with this fictitious commentator that does his little 2-minute show, covering the increasing difficulty of small businesses to get loans due to the scandal of the savings and loan frauds and failures, and therefore there's going to be obviously a slump in retail business in the immediate future. And I point out that all of that, if you kept up at all, if you had any particular interest or just vague interest, you could go yeah, because it all fits. It all seems to push the right kind of buttons, makes the right kind of connections. But I also point out that in the best way to put this, the most simplistic way, the fella, theoretically, life won't allow this sort of thing. It's not primed to do it. But the man theoretically could have sat there, took a nap, had a hangover, and it's suddenly time to do the show, and he's got nothing, and he almost, on the spot, made up the whole thing. And you recall, and everything I tried to get you to consider last time, and then I asked, what difference does it make? I wanted to push that a little bit further. If any of that, taking the example, let me see if I can stretch the example a little bit so that you're not that inclined to get caught up with the specifics. What if we had way off the shelf of the continent in the interior of Antarctica, and we had a group of people put there for some reason doing a scientific study of something, and they're isolated there for 6 months. They have one radio, and it just so happens there's only one guy that knows how to operate the radio. And so they're stuck, and let's say it's a handful, a dozen or so, of educated, sophisticated people. Now, I don't know who else would be down there. They don't seem to be out trying to troll around to pick up bricklayers and ditch diggers to go down there and say, won't you go down and help us do some research in Antarctica? At least the bricklayers I know wouldn't say, yeah, count me in. At any rate, we're talking about educated, sophisticated people. They're down there and they've got one access. They're plugged into the system of ordinary civilization through one guy. And he seems to be educated, sophisticated, sane. And he sits there and he is the only guy that can operate, let's say you just have to trust me, that the radio comes in, how about Morse code? And he's the only guy that can operate it. At any rate, and nobody really questions it. And so every day he tries to tune in, like to the Voice of America or the BBC overseas, and he picks up and he conveys to them. Perhaps he writes out little notes, puts them on a bulletin board next to his desk. He sits there 14 hours a day, and he puts in things such as, they now had the first free elections in Czechoslovakia in 40 years. And President Bush, for the Americans, says so-and-so happens today. And the people, they keep track. And then periodically, maybe once a week, he sends out messages. And he lets people, they have to set up some way that there's only a short messages that people say, try to contact a shortwave somebody in the United States and ask them to call my wife and just tell her happy birthday. Just a little short thing. So he does all that. And things go along. People get the news, and he brings in the ball scores. He tells how the Super Bowl came out. What if the guy, let's say when he first got there, dropped the damn radio and broke it, and he knew how mad everybody would be. And so for 6 months he sits there and he makes all this up. Now remember, he's pretty educated, sophisticated, glib, and he knows about what's going on, so he just makes up stuff. And some days it's a slow day, and he points out, and then other days he'll make up that Lithuania is now armed and threatening to march on Leningrad. And he said, wait a minute, I've got to check that. That's unbelievable. Anyway, he does all this. To go along with the other example, now that seems maybe more widespread, but at any rate. What if he made all that up? And even he sent out the messages once a week. And then he would set aside a few hours on Saturday when supposedly he was in contact with one or two guys that were shortwave operators in Florida or in Peru that spoke English, and so that they were transferring these personal messages. And so on Saturday he'd sit there and he'd do all this stuff, and he's talking in the code or doing whatever he's doing that nobody else knows about or they don't want to fool with. They got their own jobs. And so he, after it's over with on Saturday night, he tells the people, all right, I got through your message, and I sent word to happy birthday to your wife, and I did get it back. She says that the kids are fine. You went ahead, and the guy says 2 kids. And he says, yeah, that's right, 2 kids. Your wife says the kids are fine, and that she sure does miss you. And he goes, ah. So he does all this. What if for 6 months he makes up the whole business? My question again is, no sarcasm, no nothing. You got to be able to try and begin to analyze the way life is wired up in a subversive way. The question really is, so what? Not only the so what that no damage has been done, you must see this from the last taping. It's not just that nothing has been harmed, perhaps. It is a part of the growth mechanism of life. Now, all that was still just to catch us back up to date, because I have a new question for you. What difference would it make in a truly sang-froid, cold-blooded, clinical, truly objective 5-dimensional view? What difference would it make if you found out that everything that you have learned, that everything that you have ever been told through all sources was made up? The full field, the full silo, the full system that seems to have stocked this. Every little trout and guppy swimming up here. Is what I was trying to convey, that everything that you know, everything that you've been told, everything that you've learned, everything that you've read, everything that stocked the aquarium of your intellect, what if you found out it was phantom fish? That it was all made up? Think a second. Now, before I say so what, do realize this kind of subversive analysis, which surely most of you can do now, one of those first steps is it should strike you that, as weird as that is, and even though I can see already or suspect that part of the answer, at least, to so what is, so what, that there would be no difference, is, remember, not what is the meaning of life, but how is the meaning of life. How is it that life has arranged such things that at first what would strike me at the ordinary level, if I heard this, and I considered the possibility that everything I know was somehow made up, not dissimilar to the examples that he made, that there is some operator somewhere, and that if I did put myself metaphorically being stranded there in Antarctica instead of 6 months for 67 years, and one source has been feeding me information. Of course, you've got to take it really for the time being, paradigmatically, but that one source has been feeding me information. And what if that source, in some way, through whatever conditions, maybe this source that told me everything, of course we're saying me, you need, instead of the individual, you need to think about me and the species, that all of humanity, that this source somewhere dropped the radio, which really aside, you might take that as some of those curious side paths that all the stories of creation and all the religions have just almost immediately. As they say, the good guys, the good forces, made everything. And almost immediately, some of the good forces' friends, the God's friends, in the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, God, Jehovah did all this, and then this angel, one of his right-hand men, got real frisky, miscued. What if that sort of thing, all they're talking about is that somebody that was put in charge dropped the radio, and it passed as evil, because then from then forth they had to begin as quick as they could to make up all this. You know, at least the guy had found out. What do you mean you dropped the damn radio? You were in charge of this. I made all this and these people, and I put you in charge, and so he made it up. That was just one possibility. It wasn't even a possibility. It was just a fairy tale. But what should strike you back where we were to start doing this kind of subversive analysis is, if that could be true, why would I find it so shocking at the ordinary level when I first heard it? Why would I, at my intelligence operating at the ordinary level, want to absolutely dismiss this out of hand to even go into, if I consider it to be a strong possibility, almost go into some sort of cerebral conniption fit? That it's just, there's no real word for it. Obscene. You mean I've spent my whole life not just pursuing academic education, but trying to be broad-minded, trying to travel, trying to become sophisticated, trying to think more universally, or at least worldly. I try all this. I try to listen to other opinions. I studied other religions. And you mean the possibility that all of that from every source was just made up, that one guy dropped the radio that was in charge of getting information into the system known as man, and he dropped the radio until he can figure out what to do, he's had to make all this up. Why does that strike my ordinary intelligence as being at least obscene to the 10th power, probably? Maybe I exaggerate, 6th or 7th power. But really distasteful. Why? Because now we're back to the question, if it was true on an individual level, the question still survives, so what? And yet it strikes the intelligence itself, the highest operations inside of man's nervous system, it strikes it as, that would be like finding out, God forbid, that there is no Santa Claus. That the Easter Bunny actually has 2 jobs. It would just seem to strike literally at the heart of reality. And that's just words. That's just philosophical words almost to the intellect. Because what it strikes it, and it should, if it heard it in the right way, and the way I'm talking about, by right way, I mean in a certain way. If it heard in a certain way, the intellect should, by God, shudder. But then the question should be, once you see it shuddering, so what? Not that that's the question, but you shouldn't be surprised by now that these kinds of things can make the intellect shudder, which is one reason some people, besides that some people can be exposed to such as this and just almost immediately kind of have a shudder and think, I got to go. Which, if nobody's ever thought about it, is if you need any more proof of the health and resilience that life has installed in the human nervous system. That the vast, to say the least, majority, almost everybody on this planet, to be exposed to such as this, nah. That's a sign of health. That is rosy cheeks, good lung power of the intellect, for ordinary people to go, no. It shows that there's still resilience in their golf ball, that they're not going to fall. They're not going to get stuck with this. All right, back to, what if all that you seem to know was made up? And stretch made up as far as you can. I gave you enough examples. Just take it that Antarctic crew should give you enough to go on, that if you were in such a situation that your environment, your intellectual environment, was funneled through one source, this one operator that could operate the radio. Of course, I keep saying this is a kind of allegory. But anyway. But if you imagine that everything that has formed your intellect, everything, even what ordinary people, of course, consider their own personal environment, that is, the things that happened to me as a child, they didn't happen to you. They were told to you. Yeah, but they happened. Okay. But it's still part of this. If it wasn't part of this, you wouldn't even know it happened. And so, at the very least, if you're going to get real crippled with it, you told you. Now, it was an experience. My father used to beat me when he got drunk. Yeah, but you told yourself that. Now he beat me. I understand that. But were it not now a part of your intellect, you would know he beat you. Unless you still had some broken bones. I thought all of you understood that by now. It's not a matter that he didn't beat you, but it would not be a part of what seems to be you. It would not be up here unless somebody had told you. Well, nobody had to. I remember it. But the only way you remember it is you say, hello, I have a message for me. The old man beat me again, and I've about had enough of this crap. It's going to be a cold day in Cleveland before I forget this. So you were told. What if everything you were told was made up? So what? What if every you on this planet was an invention? But not of your own. Not of your environment. What if the information, everything that you know, that you have, that has formed your intellect, was an invention, was made up? Of course, an ordinary person tried to deal with that. You can't, because then you got to look off and go, And of course, you're done for. Which is another way of saying, of course, it shows that you are still resilient and in good health. To look off and go, well, I don't know. As a metaphor, that may have some passing merit, if not fancy to it, but I don't know. Of course, that's a sure sign that you do know. That is, that you do know that, no, that can't be true. When, from another view, it is just as obvious as a tick on a goat, or even on a philosopher. It could not be more obvious, or else a person could answer this, that they could even hear me present the question, all right, what are you going to say next? Now, I hate to play dirty and always have to come back to that, but you people force me to do it. What are you going to say next? And of course, ordinary people, almost everybody on this planet, won't even tolerate that. They won't even listen to it, or they're healthy enough to go, what? What a dumb question. Sure it is. It's probably the dumbest question in the world, because there is no answer. None from anybody. And to be faced with that at a more manifold level would make the intellect, I guess, give a whole new definition to the word shudder. But if you don't know what you're going to say next, then you're left with all kinds of possibilities. One of them being that your information is coming through a radio operator somewhere, and he's telling you. And the only thing you know is what he's telling you, which, may be all right, because all he's doing, instead of just coming in from the world, just him taking in short waves from the BBC overseas, maybe he's getting information from the big guy, from reality. So if that's so, then the question is to so what is no longer of any merit, because if the information he's getting, if indeed I am being fed everything that supports my intellect through this one source, if that one source is directly plugged in to the source, then I'm all right. So if an ordinary person did that, and I was still dumb enough to still be conversing with them, I might say something like, so that means that you're not even going to fool around with the question as what you're going to say next. And by then, of course, they go, what? So that's the way it goes. One way to look at also, when I say what difference would it make if you were an invention? Some of you might get something from this. What difference could it possibly make so long as life has its own intelligence? That's assuming that some of you get a continual glimpse that life by God does have its own intelligence outside of what appears to be the operations of man going on constantly. It's just not recognized. All people smell it, and they put all these weird names on it, but it's not recognized as directly and as obviously as it is. You remember, like fingers. I'll give you a good crude one I've pulled several times for other reasons. The fingers, the eyes at the end of the fingers are fry cooks. to be able to talk and place a bet and talk to you across the room, and to drop in stuff in a deep fry and get that close to it every time. Man's got eyes at the ends of his fingers. There's no doubt about it. It is life's own intelligence operates. It is not limited to man on this planet. And once you realize that even what does seem to be your intelligence, at the very best you're getting piecemeal as being a part of life's own intelligence, then any question as to, well, what I know is either faulty, misdirected, or in fact, according to this kind of metaphorical hint, might be made up, you begin to see that there is no difference. Literally. It has no impact on anybody. All it is a sign that you can see in a wider sense that you no longer take what you think personally, which, you know, anybody that takes what they think personally, I hate to say this, can't think to start with. Well, I'm sort of insulted by that. I know. That's why I didn't say it to you. Do you know my credentials? I am prepared to be impressed. But after I hear them, the question is, all right, what are you going to say next? What kind of dumb question is that? A man with my credentials, you think you think I have to entertain those kind of dumb questions? If life has its own intelligence working, and you begin to see that that is what is working, then there are no shudder causing, there are no crippling, even theoreticals hidden in all this that would make the intellect want to shut down, or to make the intellect continue to naysay against any idea that it might be in any way less than totally in control of what it does. When it's noted in these tapings something about your genes know, or there's some information that is still extant in the ancestral DNA in everybody, or in you, that is not theoretical. When you see that life, non-mortally, the primary way, now I grant you that's the basis in the last many months I've been trying to sketch, that it is man's intellect that is the center point of how life thinks at this level. But to blindly accept that that is the only manifestation of life's intellect is through man, if that's still true with any of you, you sure are missing a lot. And I don't mean anything hidden. All you got to do is look around. The smell of it, as I said, a kind of low-level awareness of it, obviously, you should see, is the basis for the ideas of gods, for the ideas of a subconsciousness, a collective consciousness in mankind. Or when people use nature, I guess, with a big N in the anthropomorphic sense. All of that is based upon the reality that there is intelligence in life itself that is not limited to man. There is no reason ordinary man should look around and find intelligence going on. It'd just be confusing. It's confusing enough that he has from one view, a sensation of it, and then has to turn it into guides and forces beyond him, forces outside the system, which would be no kind of intelligence. Or if you want to call it intelligence, you're back to the fact that if there was an intelligence outside the system, then any part that is in the system is going to be fragmented. It is going to be piecemeal. And so it's just simply not seen. Not seen in any operational sense. The intellect does not deal, even in an intellectual way, with the question of there being intelligence going on outside of man that is not in conflict with man, it is not auxiliary to man, it is not transcendental. It's simply there and it's going on all the time. And if you subtract, if you know how to do it, inside the equation, if you subtract out what seems to be individual man's intelligence, what effect would it have? And of course, if you can see that far, the answer is that can't be done, but if it could be done, because then you're back to the question, well, what difference did it make for this handful of people in Antarctica for 6 months that got the news, kept up to date, got scores, sent messages home, got messages back from home, and at the end of the 6 months found out that the radio operator made every single iota piece of that information up. What difference does it make? Besides them, immediately, I guess, a lot of them, knowing how men are, especially after 6 months, holed up by themselves, they would probably be a bit irritable. And there'd probably be a few of them that wag their finger at the radio operator's face. But as soon as the plane touched down and picked them up to take them out, who cares? What difference did it make? That'd be the same way as subtracting what seems to be individual intelligence. Well, if anybody wants another side trip, as part of the humor, if you've got more than 2 or 3 eyes, as part of the humor of ordinary people, we're not laughing at them, are we? No. But of ordinary people being very concerned about mind control. And people being in the... well, it's part of life now, I understand. But people being on these tabloid TV things, and they'll flash on here, Joe Squatweiler's sister, and she'll be saying, well, since Joe joined up with those people down in Arkansas, I don't know. He shaved his head, shaved his eyebrows, and he began to worship a pumpkin. And which, I don't try to pick on other people's religion, but I'm going to tell you what, Joe's not himself. I know what's going on. It's what they call it. It's mind control. Well, that's a real fear. I mean, it is with people. Mind control. Even the sound of it is. But notice it's good for a hearty chuckle is to think mind control. I'm being, I assume, somewhat hopeful and magnanimous that none of you are laughing in a sarcastic way. You're laughing over the fact that people are worrying about mind control. Like, I'm going to lose control of my mind and someone else is going to take over control. Hey, well, that is frightening. Yeah. That another human is going to wrest away control of my mind and they're going to take it. Makes one shudder. Of course, it makes some people shudder, but not over what the rest of you think is shudderfying. Well, let's apparently change the subject a little bit. That's known as, I guess, a segue, just to make you think that between movements of the symphony, between the minuet and it's between movements. As modern, contemporary, ordinary, intellectually centered man is more and more charged with what amounts to a kind of recreating of this world. That is the all matter of secondary affairs, which is a kind of recreating of this planet, of the human planet, of the human world. Being charged with this kind of increasing, moment to moment almost, the increasing responsibility of a kind of recreating. Ordinary people, ordinary intellect is faced also more and more with what would seem to be 2 distinct possibilities to execute this responsibility. And one of them being apparently to move things around externally. Of course, as always, to give you 2 examples in the 3D world, they're relative to one another, and neither can stand alone per se. But one of them would seem to be that man rearranges things out there. Social engineering, new laws, political action, changing things economically, trying to redistribute wealth, changing tax laws, religious, less and less importance in most parts of the world now. But things that would be, in all manner, human engineering, socially, politically, economically. The other possibility is that some way to internally in man's thinking, in the individual's thinking, to rearrange things. And as life becomes more complex, even though from some views it appears to some people that it's getting more simplistic, that there seems to be less forms of diverse life. That is, that on this planet, when you get into secondary affairs in one way, it seems to be becoming more and more of a one-worldly affair. More and more one-worldly, of course it's not obviously, circa 1990, but becoming more so before your very eyes, becoming more and more drawn to what appears to be right now a more homogeneous glob politically, economically, socially, that things seem to be leveling out right now the way it seems to be. More and more is becoming closer to a free market, democratic, political system, which of course covers economics. And it seems to be more and more of a humanist view of life than an old-time religious view. And so that would, from one view, say, well, life is becoming more simplistic. If it keeps going that way, we're all going to end up about the same color. We'll have enough intermixing of all tribes, races, religions, political persuasions. We'll all come out looking beige, I guess. We'll all have the personality of wallpaper. We'll all be safe, and we will not harm our neighbors, and we'll all make $11,370 a year. And we'll all drive a Honda Civic. There'll be no greed, there'll be no warfare, and etc. So that would be the only reason I went through all that. That is not a prediction. And even if it is, I do not want to think about being surrounded by beige people. If there are any beige people looking, no offense. It's just you let too many apartment owners steal your glory in times past. But it would appear from one view, what I was trying to get you to see, that you, the same way as some of the paleontologists and biologists now theorize that the normal Darwinian idea of evolution may be faulty in that there is more and more fossil evidence that there are less life forms, and therefore the idea of evolution being a branching out from one central original tree trunk may be faulty. And I pointed out to you, as you recall, that boy, could make your reputation. That is just as obvious as can be, right? Except for the fact that the opposite is just as obvious. Of course it's not, but the obvious is just as real, once I pointed out. It's just as plausible, and in fact, those of you are getting somewhere close to some 5D insight every now and then. To say it's the same thing is really to insult it. To say that opposites are the same thing is really profane. To say that in some way that they are partners, it's like dragging your fingers across a chalk cerebellum if you knew it, because there is nothing to say about them. But will that stop us? Not on your life. But it would seem, as I started to get you to ponder, it might seem from one view, very likely seem that things are becoming more simplistic, but they are not becoming more simplistic from another view, quite valid view. They're not becoming more simplistic in that, from an individual level, people apparently are now, once you can see it, more and more charged with not only considering an apparently individual being primed, wired, and motivated to worry about how things might be rearranged out here, politically, economically, etc., but also inside. Not only what's going on out here, but the other corollary, the other possibility is, what do I think about it? Should I change my way of thinking? Is it enough that we stop picking on our neighbors over here who are polka dot and of a different religion? Now, we pass laws and we always beat them in every time we had warfare, so we stopped that. We've taken them into our society. But now, that's not enough. Now I need to rearrange. We got to stop all of us still bad-mouthing them and not liking them. So that would seem like, well, we're going to bring it in and have less of a polyglot world. But the responsibility of humans, the human intellect, really becomes more varied, that there is more of an individual responsibility. Now, with ordinary people, that is, with the running of everybody's ordinary intellect, this responsibility, or me saying people are charged with it, this is not like some pseudo minister or priest saying, I have a new revelation that you people don't know about. And hold on to your skirts and your knickers and your pocketbook, because the guides told me that 20% of everything you own is not enough. And everybody goes, I knew it. Boy, every time the guides talk to him, watch it. The reason I went through that little humorous interlude, it's not that what I'm saying is some revelation. It is simply going on and people do not notice it. But at the ordinary level, people are being more and more responsible. They don't know it, they do not choose to do it, but what it amounts to once you get past the verbal forms of it, the intellectual skeleton of it, the energy behind it is this, that the energy itself is more varied. There is simply more going on. Life is needing. Once you see it, there can't be any question. Life is needing new forms of energy, variations of what's been going on, little new spins, little twists. It's almost a process of improvisation, of trying things here and there, as I've tried to get you to see through other examples. But even these little hit and miss, even these little attempts that may only last momentarily, if you'll notice, there are more of them. All right? It struck me, I hate to do it because it's repeated, I hear it or read it now once a day, which is nobody's concern, but the energy that I'm talking about is the very energy over probably one of the most oft-quoted phrases in the Western world in the last 10 years. We won't stop and play guess-up, but it's not Billy Graham, it's not Ronald Reagan, it's Andy Warhol. Do I even have to tell you what the quote is? Regarding the fleeting nature of fame that may fall upon each and every person, that is, that the day's coming, everybody's going to be famous for 15 minutes. Right, I did it. Why is that re-quoted so much? It's not just, don't say it's just glib or it's cute. It's exactly what I'm talking about. That is the energy behind it. That may be true. It may get to the point, as Kyrut was pointing out, that humanity may not be capable of sustained contemporary growth, the kind of necessary positive mutations and cloning, if man did not have celebrities, not religions, not dope, celebrities. Notice how fleeting it is now, celebrities. Notice how fleeting it is, important figures, not just celebrities in the, quote, entertainment field, but politically, religiously, philosophically. It is almost that. Everything may be famous for 15 minutes. And it's someday, it's not important, but that may be an overstatement of it. But do you not see that that is not some kind of pejorative comment on the flimsy nature of human attention or our disposable society and all that, which all that's true enough at the ordinary level, but I'm pointing out the energy behind it. It is not a regression, it is an expansion. But if you live too long, which all of you has already lived too long if you're ordinary, am I going to have to stop with that one? If you're ordinary, you've already lived too long. Because if you're ordinary, you know this, there's at least a little bit wrong with life. And so there's your proof you've already lived too long. You're already becoming melancholy over the fact that everything that the radio operator had told you was good and decent and should be pursued, and that you took at face value, having fat choice you had, everything you took at face value, you have now been taken off that cold continent, and now that you're back home and kind of defrosting, your concept of reality and goodness is beginning to likewise melt. Therefore, if you find any human, you say, is life absolutely perfect? And if they say, by what view? No, don't give me that crap. I'm just asking you, is life absolutely perfect? Do you mean from a Christian? No. All right, do you mean from my view as being a republic? No. Is life perfect? Who's going to say, well, yes? You dummy. Nobody. So that shows that anybody who would answer that question has already lived too long. You're already dying. So therefore, anything can be pointed out that is different is downhill. It's all regression. And so, anybody who grew up, did that get too complex? Anybody who grew up and part of their reality was that everybody would be famous for 15 minutes. Let's try that. Some of you people, unbelievable, that were born after 1920 and 30. But at any rate, some of you who grew up, and if you accepted it as the truth that everybody will be famous for 15 minutes and that's about par for the course, then, by the time you accept that, it is already deteriorating. It's beginning to melt. Because if that be part of your reality then, if that be part of what is the basis of your, not just you individuals, but it would be a whole lot of yous. It'd be your tribe, your generation. Then as soon as that is part of your own vernacular, it's down to 14 minutes. And even if it's not stated, you'll begin to realize it, as you should. And you begin to get it's known in biological circles as the RA. I can't say it, they're still doing some taping. You get upset. There is a chink in that perfect Tiffany armor of life. That suddenly things are not exactly right. Of course, the line when everything's all right that you cross over to where you begin to have criticism of life, I guess I'm making it sound, any of you who might be getting this for the first few times, as though it's some sort of something that, when I say that you already lived too long, that maybe you're thinking 20 or 30 or something like that. Think about it. When's the first time you complained? When do most people complain? At least you think this is some kind of middle-aged crazy I'm talking about. Do I have to answer? When does most people first complain? Simple. When they can first talk. I know, let's don't think about that. Unless you want a real sidestep, do you ever hear about the kid that seemed to be, his motor skills and everything else seemed to be fine. He got to be 2, 3, 4, he never talked, and they kept taking him to the doctors, and they, x-ray and check it. He seemed fine, 6 years old. In every other way, the kid is just a joy. He is normal, but he doesn't talk. So he sits down in his 7th year, going on his 7th year of life, and he sits down one at the table and he looks down and he says, "Ugh, rutabagas again." And the family, of course, is just overjoyed, and after the crying and everything gets calmed down, the father grabs the kid and said, "You can talk." He said, "Well, sure." He said, "Well, why didn't you say something?" He said, "Well, up until now, everything was all right." Of course, I guess there are those in life that think that's some kind of joke. I mean, you laugh, but remember, just because it's funny doesn't mean it's a joke. This kind of expansion, this kind of the intellect beginning to, in a sense, reinvent life. It's not to replace life. It's not for love to simply, immediately in some way, replace sex, or for dining to replace eating, for hobbies, professions, getting somewhere in the slaughter queue of life, for that replacing looking after yourself, self-preservation. It's not that it is a matter of it absolutely replacing it, but for those that you are really trying to get into another time zone, it doesn't mean that that couldn't happen. But if it happened, then you'd have nothing to compare it to, and the creatures then wouldn't realize, hey, there used to be something called sex, and we don't have it anymore. Now we got love. See, they wouldn't know it. Back to the subject. All right. This kind of recreation, this kind of establishment of an institutionalized new reality which cannot be separated at all, hint, hint, from talk. Hint, hint, cannot be separated at all. It happens very gradually. It is happening, as I pointed out, the tempo is increasing. It is easier to see once you can begin to think in a new place inside of your own brain, but it still happens gradually. But to do this sort of thing, gradual is not enough. At the ordinary level, as all of you have got quite adequate proof, without me trying to give any proof, your own brain operating, that this, if it is happening at all, and you get a glimpse of it, it is happening gradually and it is happening without any individual effort. That is, me calling it being charged with responsibility. It requires no effort. All you got to do is breathe. All you got to do is breathe. And get out of bed, I guess, sometimes. But it requires no individual effort, and it is gradual. But to do this sort of stuff, gradual and no effort, of course, is, are we going to guess? Probably not the best you can do. How about that? That to pursue a kind of neural subversion on your own, gradual and lack of any individual responsibility, that is effort, not moral or religious, but of actually having to make effort, will not do, because to be a real revolutionist, what you have got to do continually is, shall we count the ways I love thee? You have got to, one, you've got to continually think more than you have to. Two, you've got to be able to analyze without comparisons. Three, you have got to be able to entertain simultaneously multiple knocks at the neural door. You have got to be able to think beyond the ordinary use of life, using talk and thinking as a kind of defense. You have got to learn how to use talk and your own thought as a kind of offensive weapon. You have got to be able to do all of that in such a way as to literally, off on your own, give a whole new connotation, at least, to the term cold-blooded. You have got to be able, in your own non-existent, invisible, pictorial dictionary, look up cold-blooded, and next to it is your picture. Well, it's not your picture. It's a picture of your brain. I'm just assuming that most of you wouldn't recognize your brain if you saw it, which is another night's taping, and hopefully I'll never even get into that. But just to see a photograph of it or a drawing, I don't think most of you would recognize it. So, let's play a serious aside for a second. Would anybody care to have a test? Like, I give you a question that you can use on your own. I'm not going to ask you to answer it, of course. But you could use on yourself, that if any of you wondered, God knows why you would, but if you wondered, am I actually making any progress in this? You know, since nobody knows what it is, I don't know how you're going to figure you're making any progress. But I know you got to feel like, well, I'm doing something. Right? It's not as funny as that sounds, because I know it happens, but I can give you, of course the secret is the question itself is kind of, but anyway, you got to play along. I'll give you a question. Now I'm going to give you a statement, but then the test is a question that you ask yourself. You got it? I'm going to give you a statement, and then you ask yourself, does that make any sense to me? There is the test for this evening, at least, or for the year, and until next time I think of such fall to Roy. Don't make a joke about Roy. All right. Here is a statement. Now remember, I'm just going to make the statement, and then you're supposed to ask yourself to gauge whether you're making any sort of headway with this, or perhaps find out that your head is in the way. As you ask yourself, does this make any sense to me? Now, in the full sense of that, you understand, that is, could this be a more manifest, more manifold statement of the way things are? As impossible as irrational as it is on the surface, of course. You know that's coming, or I wouldn't be saying it. Unless I was sick, and I'm about to say something reasonable. It passed, all right. Kind of like having menopause in one foot, I guess. All right, here's the statement. Here's the statement. Here's the picture. Here's the story to use for your test question. If a real revolutionist, whatever that means, if a real revolutionist decided that he or she would no longer ever throw garbage out of their car window, if they did so, it would be on the basis that they did it and decided to do it for no reason at all. I like that one. I'll stick with it for a minute and see if you need another one. All right, now I know the arguments. They are reasonable and they would be real in the ordinary world. One argument, that is one reason for a person not throwing garbage out is we are slowly, gradually destroying the environment. Throwing garbage out, if nothing else, is visual pollution. We all know all that. That, of course, is versus this. But another view is that you look around and the highways and byways of life are strewn with garbage, and so a man's intellect would be well within its rights. That here he is, he got an empty beer bottle, a Perrier bottle, and his car is real clean and all that, and he's a neat person, real neat guy. And he's here and nobody's looking, and he's about to fling out the window, and he thinks, the first argument runs through his nervous system. The operator says, decent people do not pollute anyone. You don't throw garbage out the window. So he hesitates and he looks out, and there's just garbage everywhere. I mean, it's just filth, the whole highway, and he's suddenly aware of the fact that's the way it is in my country or my state. It's the way it is around here. Then, a voice says, my bet makes no difference whatsoever. Not only from the view that if I throw it out, it doesn't make any difference. It also, literally, as far as his intellect says to him, it makes no difference if I refrain from it. If I go, no, I won't do that. I just won't do it because that's not right. I am 30-something. I'm educated. I'm just not going to do that. But another voice could say, you're refraining from doing that. Now look around. Now snap out of it. Look around. If you don't throw it out, what difference is it going to make? And that is a reasonable, at the ordinary level, argument. That is, a reasonable response to that is, it makes no difference. If you do it, it makes no difference. Of course, the first argument, those of you that, any of you are still really caught up on the three-dimensional merry-go-round, then that first argument you say, well, wait a minute. If everybody did that, if everybody said, well, wait a minute, my little bit doesn't matter, and then everybody did it, it'd get worse. And the second argument, or you might think, hey, the first argument now got the other one by the short hairs. But the second argument can say, so? You mean that's why I shouldn't? Well, I thought maybe some of you would try and follow a merry-go-round that can go around the worm screw and go up just a little bit, even when it comes back around on you. That is, if you're playing 2- and 3-dimensional picturizations, the snake about to bite its tail, it looks up and, hey, it's somebody else's tail. Except it appears to be at the end of my body. We're out of time. You've got to press on yourselves with that. The question. The question to ask yourself, can you find any real sense in that? And I'm not playing with words, as you should know. I shouldn't have to defend it, as silly as it sounds. There is a certain kind of subversive. There's a certain kind of more complex, say different kind of working of the nervous system that if somebody decided not to throw garbage out of their window, any argument in the world, I don't care what it is, would not be the basis of their decision. And of course, this kind of person, it doesn't mean that they're oblivious or that they don't know. Wait a minute. They're discovering that this kind of stuff is not just ugly, but throwing out this kind of stuff, this polyvinyl, this stuff is going to lay there and pollute the environment. And it'll finally begin to break down maybe someday and start to pollute the water table. And it could poison us. It's not that the person doesn't know all that. But this kind of operation within one's nervous system, if somebody decided to do something, or in this case, to refrain from doing something, which of course is doing something, but if they decided to do it, it would be for one reason only, that they decided to do it. This is not some form of ersatz, pseudo, semi, down-home Zen. As long as you decide to do something, and the information is because, that you will tolerate it, you will entertain it, even to yourself. But of course, most people, are not only to themselves, would be glad to share it. If somebody was singing in the car with you, and you rolled down the window, and you started to, another person threw theirs out, and then you went and you stopped, and the person said, "Oh, did you know I've been worrying about that? I throw stuff on my car all the time, and I keep thinking I shouldn't do it. But you just struck me. I saw you were about to do it, weren't you?" And you go, "Yeah." And you decided not to. And you say, "Well, yes. Just look. Can you see the filth?" No, yeah, yeah. And do you understand some of the damage we're doing, probably permanently trying to, yeah. So what you're saying is, I'm not doing this because. In this case, it's because of what? Three-dimensionally speaking, damn good reasons. Humane reasons, intellectual reasons, reasonable reasons. But that will not do for this sort of stuff. If you're going to do something, and you know we're out of time, which is good, because there's really nothing more to say about this. If you decided to do something, if you were a real revolutionist, even if it seemed to be something decent, even if it seemed to be what everybody else was in favor of, or all right-thinking people at any given time, if you decided to do it, it would have nothing to do with that. And it's worse than that. It's not that you wouldn't have nothing to do, it's worse than nothing to do. Which maybe I will pick this up again next time we tape. But you would decide to do it. Such a person would decide, such a nervous system that could think and talk, would decide to do it for one reason. Well, there are two ways to put it. It would decide to do it, and the reason is there is no reason. The way I'd prefer it tonight, or to leave it, here we go, 5 seconds. Such a person would decide to do it for one reason, because they decided to do it. That means I'm about to cut it off. We're out of tape.